Rhett Calder rode slowly across the cracked red plains, his boots dusty from weeks of travel. The sun hung low, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. His cargo crawler hummed quietly behind him, carrying supplies that most people no longer wanted. Out here at the edge of the known worlds, life was hard and company was rare. Rhett liked it that way. Silence gave him space to think, and the quiet of the desert was his kind of friend. But today the silence was broken. A faint sound drifted on the wind, a soft, trembling whisper that made him stop. Rhett's hand went to the reins and his ears pricked. The voice was weak, almost nothing, but it carried fear, hunger, and hope all at once. He dismounted carefully, letting the crawler idle. The sound came again. "We haven't eaten in days." Rhett's eyes scanned the horizon. The words seemed to come from a narrow canyon ahead, where the wind had tossed rocks and dust into small piles. Smoke curled faintly from the canyon floor, old and cold. He moved closer, boots crunching on the dry dirt, until he saw a figure huddled among twisted metal and broken rocks. A dragon. Not a full-grown one, but a dragon nonetheless. Its scales were gray with dust, and one wing hung limply at its side. Beside it crouched two smaller dragons, their bright eyes dull with hunger. Rhett had seen dragons before, usually in cages or parades, always controlled, always performing for humans. But these were different. Scared. Broken. Alive but barely. The dragon's eyes met his, wide and wary. "Don't come closer," it whispered, voice soft like dry leaves brushing together. "We are alone, don't take us." Rhett stopped, raising his hands slowly. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I'm just passing through. I can leave if you want." The widow, for that is what the mother dragon was, lowered her head slightly, studying him. She was thin, ribs showing beneath dusty scales, and one eye had a faint scar across it. The other looked at him with pain and suspicion. "Humans, take everything, leave nothing," she said. "We die if you touch us." Rhett nodded. He stayed where he was, letting her see he meant no harm. "I won't touch you. I just saw you. You need food." His voice was calm, steady. The wind carried it gently. The dragon hesitated. Hunger pulled her forward, but fear held her back. "We haven't eaten in days," she whispered again, voice shaking. The hatchlings whimpered softly behind her. Rhett noticed their small, sharp teeth and trembling wings. They looked like they had flown far but had nothing to land on, nothing to eat. Rhett reached slowly into his coat pocket and pulled out a small pack of dried rations. He set them down on a flat rock a good distance away. "I'm not going to move closer. You can take them if you want." The dragon's head twitched. She looked at the food, then at him, then back at the hatchlings. She made a soft hissing sound, almost a laugh, almost a growl of disbelief. Slowly, very slowly, she leaned forward. Her jaws were gentle, taking the food piece by piece. The hatchlings followed, pecking at crumbs. Rhett watched quietly, leaning against a boulder. He had spent most of his life on the frontier, helping humans survive harsh deserts, pirate raids, and storms. But he had never fed dragons like this. Not out of duty, not out of fear, not for fame. Simply because they needed it. After they ate, the dragon's eyes softened. "Why help us?" she asked, voice barely above the wind. Rhett shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe because nobody else will. Maybe because I can." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes the world gets too big and too cruel. Doesn't mean we have to be cruel too." The dragon's gaze lingered on him. She could sense honesty. She could sense that he wasn't lying, that he had no hidden trap. She had lived long enough to know most humans meant harm, and yet here was one who meant nothing but food and water. Water. Rhett reached into the crawler and brought out a small collapsible water filter. He filled it from a nearby stream and left it where she could drink. "Take it slowly. Drink. You need it more than I do." The dragon lowered her head to the water. Her scales glimmered slightly as she drank, and the hatchlings followed, tilting their small heads to sip carefully. Rhett stayed back, silent. He noticed the way the wind brushed across her wings, the way the hatchlings shivered, and something in him tightened, a mix of sympathy, respect, and something deeper he could not name. The sun dipped lower and shadows stretched across the canyon. Rhett set up a small tarp near the edge of the canyon and unloaded a few more rations. He worked slowly, making noise only when necessary. The dragon watched, curiosity mixing with caution. She noticed the way he moved, steady and careful, without fear, without arrogance. He was not here to conquer. He was here to survive, and in helping them he survived too, but not by taking, by giving. Night came fast. The desert was cold and Rhett lit a small fire at a safe distance, the flames crackling softly. The dragon widow lay curled with her hatchlings, eyes flicking toward him once in a while, assessing, wondering, learning. Rhett did not move. He simply watched, listening to the wind, listening to the soft breaths of the dragons. He had no plan beyond this moment. There was no promise of friendship, no guarantee they would trust him tomorrow. But for tonight at least they were alive. And sometimes he thought that was enough. As the stars came out, scattered like silver dust across the sky, the canyon fell quiet again. Not the silence of loneliness but the silence of understanding. One human, 3 dragons, and the fragile hope that kindness could still exist in the universe. Rhett leaned back, hands behind his head, watching the stars. Tomorrow, he said softly, more to himself than anyone else, we figure out how to survive. And in the shadowed canyon, the whisper of hope returned, small but steady, like the wind carrying seeds across the desert. Morning came slowly over the red plains. Sunlight spilled into the canyon, warming the rocks and scattering long shadows. The dragon widow stirred first, her scales catching the light, and her hatchlings nudged her softly, restless and hungry. Rhett Calder was already awake. He had slept lightly near the edge of the canyon, keeping one eye on the sky and the other on the fire he had left smoldering. He watched the dragons for a moment, seeing them alive, moving with slow caution. Their trust was fragile, but it was there. It had begun last night with food and water, small gifts that meant nothing to him yet everything to them. Rhett moved quietly, letting them see him as a calm presence rather than a threat. Are you going to stay? The widow asked softly, voice low, almost shaking. Rhett shook his head. I have to keep moving but not far. I'll be close. I don't want you alone, but I also can't stop my work. You understand? The dragon did not answer immediately. She lowered her head toward the hatchlings, letting them see his hands open and empty. Slowly her tension eased. She understood more than words. Humans often promised help only to take more than they gave. But Rhett was different. Rhett set up a small camp closer to the canyon's mouth, where the hatchlings could explore a little and he could move freely. He pulled out more rations, careful not to crowd them. Eat slowly, he said. Don't get sick. You need strength, not hurry. The widow nodded and the hatchlings nibbled cautiously. One of them, smaller and frilier, tripped over a rock and yipped softly. Rhett went over and lifted it gently. Careful, little one, he said. You'll be flying soon. You just need some food first. He placed it back on the ground and the hatchling shook its head, then crawled to nibble at the rations. As the morning passed, Rhett worked quietly, checking his supplies and making notes of what he had to trade in the next settlement. He kept glances toward the dragons, making sure they were safe. For him, survival had always been personal, individual. Out here you could not rely on anyone else. But now he realized survival meant more than staying alive. It meant helping others stay alive too, even if they were not human. The widow studied him as he worked. Humans usually take, she said softly. Why help us? Rhett paused, looking at her carefully. I could tell you a long story about frontier laws, about honor, about not liking the empire, he said. But the truth? I just couldn't leave you to die. It doesn't make me special. It makes me human. She tilted her head, considering him. She had lived long enough to know that kindness could be a trap. But she also saw honesty. Her instincts told her to flee, but another part of her, something tired, something hungry, made her stay. She let the hatchlings eat. They trusted him slowly, inch by inch. By midday, Rhett had done something small but important. He built a makeshift shelter. Using metal scraps and a torn tarp, he created a shaded corner where the dragons could rest without fear of the sun burning them. It was not much, but it was better than nothing. He even left some rations in a hidden compartment beneath a rock. You can take these at night when I'm not here, he said. I'll check tomorrow, but I won't take them away. The widow's eyes flickered. Something unspoken passed between them. She could sense that he would not betray them. Humans often spoke with words of promise, but Rhett spoke with actions. That, more than anything, mattered. As Rhett worked, he noticed signs of danger. The desert was quiet too long, and distant dust clouds suggested travelers, or scouts. Out here, even neutral merchants sometimes brought trouble, and imperial patrols were always near enough to catch dragons. He did not panic. He simply prepared. He placed some metal scraps as warning markers around the canyon entrance, a primitive but effective system to signal if anyone came too close. The dragons watched curiously. The widow whispered to them, explaining in low tones what he was doing. He helps us, she said. He prepares for us. Not himself. By afternoon, Rhett had finished his small preparations. He sat back on a rock, wiping sweat from his brow, and watched the dragons. The hatchlings had grown bolder. One flapped a tiny wing, struggling to lift itself, and Rhett cheered softly. Good. That's it. Keep trying. The widow's eyes glimmered. It was the first time she had seen a human not as a threat, not as a predator, but as an ally. Her heart, heavy with loss and pain, felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Rhett spoke again, quietly, almost to himself. You'll need more than food, he said. You'll need safe paths, water, a way to survive. I'll show you what I can, but some things you have to learn yourselves. The world is harsh, but you can be stronger than it if you try. The hatchlings chirped softly, crawling to his side. He extended a hand. One brushed its tiny snout against his fingers, curious and trusting. Rhett smiled. That's it. Trust takes time. Keep trying. You'll get there. Evening came slowly and the canyon cooled. Rhett prepared a small fire again, careful to keep it far enough from the dragons. He cooked nothing for himself, simply keeping the fire alive for warmth. The dragons settled near the shelter he built, their bodies curling together, eyes flicking toward him occasionally. Rhett leaned back, looking at the stars. The Empire won't help you. Few humans would. But some of us do, he whispered. And in the quiet canyon, the dragons listened, understanding more than they could say. For the first time in days, the widow felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten. Safety. Not complete safety, not perfect safety, but enough to rest, enough to eat, enough to hope. And Rhett Calder, the man who did not turn away, had given it to them with no promise, no reward, and no expectation, simply because he could. As night fell and the desert wind moved softly across the canyon, the quiet understanding remained. One human, 3 dragons, and a fragile bond formed not from fear, but from patience, kindness, and the strength to stand by those in need. Tomorrow the work would continue. But tonight they survived together, and that was enough. The next morning the desert was calm, almost too calm. Rhett Calder woke before the sun and scanned the horizon. Dust rose faintly in the distance, curling in small, unnatural swirls. Something was coming. He could feel it in the silence, in the way the wind carried the scent of metal and oil. Imperial enforcers. He did not panic. Years on the frontier had taught him how to stay calm when danger approached. The dragon widow stirred beside her hatchlings, sensing the tension. Her scales bristled and she hissed low, warning her young. The hatchlings huddled closer, trembling. Rhett stepped forward, keeping his hands visible. Stay calm, he said quietly. I'll handle this. Just stay out of sight. The dust grew thicker and the metallic scent grew stronger. Soon, the distant figures became clear, armored walkers moving steadily across the plain, carrying scanners, weapons, and authority. They were looking for the dragons. They were also looking for anyone who had aided them. The widow's eyes widened. They take us, you, too, she whispered. Rhett nodded. Possibly. But they won't find you if I keep calm. Listen to me, follow my instructions exactly. You trust me, right? She hesitated, then inclined her head. The hatchlings made soft noises, curious and frightened. Rhett moved them quietly toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall he had noticed the day before. It was just wide enough for the dragons to fit, but hidden from scanners. He led them in and pressed his back against the rock, making sure they could not be seen. The first Imperial walker arrived at the canyon's mouth, sensors scanning. Rhett stepped out, hands raised, his face calm. I'm here, he said. I saw your patrol. You want the dragons. I don't know where they are. The officer looked at him, armor glinting in the sunlight. You have aided illegal creatures. You are in violation of Imperial Code 43. Surrender the dragons or face arrest. Rhett shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about. I passed through this canyon yesterday. I didn't see any dragons. I camped alone. You may search, but I will not betray anyone. The officer stepped closer, raising a scanner. Do not test us, human. We know someone has been feeding them. The sensors picked up life signs and energy traces. You are involved. Rhett stayed calm. Years of frontier survival had taught him one thing. Panic is worse than death. I don't care about sensors. I care about the law. You are here illegally, scaring innocent creatures. I have proof of past raids where humans were punished unfairly. Expose them first, then come after me. You will find your patrols broke the code. The officer hesitated. Imperial rules were strict, but they were also public. Violating them could bring scrutiny. Rhett had memorized reports of previous raids and abuses. He had nothing to hide, and the officer sensed it. Meanwhile, in the crevice, the widow and hatchling stayed silent. They could see the human standing alone, speaking with authority to men who carried weapons that could kill him in seconds. They felt something they had not felt before: hope. The officer looked at Rhett, then at the canyon, then back. "We will return," he said finally, clearly unsure. "But if the creatures are found in the next hour, you will face consequences." Rhett did not move. "Then I will be here, standing. And the creatures will be safe. That is my choice." The walkers retreated slowly, dust rising in their wake. Rhett waited until they were gone before moving back to the crevice. The widow's eyes shone with cautious relief. "You stood alone," she whispered. Rhett shrugged. "I have nothing to lose out here. But you have everything. You need to survive, and that matters more than anything." The hatchlings crawled to him, brushing their small heads against his hands. He smiled. "I'm not leaving you. Not yet. You'll need food, water, and knowledge. I can teach you some things. Not everything, but enough to survive." The widow studied him. "Why care so much?" Rhett thought for a moment. "Because no one else will. Because sometimes the right choice is not the easy one. You live not because I have to, but because I want to." The dragons looked at him quietly. They understood actions more than words. He had risked his life, faced authority alone, and yet he remained calm. In a world that had tried to teach them to fear humans, this one human was different. The day passed with careful preparation. Rhett built traps to warn of intruders and small shelters for the dragons to hide. He marked paths and taught them how to move quietly. He showed them where water pooled after the desert storms and how to catch small prey without being seen. The hatchlings learned quickly, and the widow followed his instructions with growing trust. By evening, the desert had cooled. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the canyon. Rhett kept a small fire, enough to warm them but not enough to be noticed from far away. He shared his rations carefully, making sure they had enough for the night. The widow spoke softly, voice full of wonder. "Humans sometimes help instead of take. You are strange." Rhett laughed quietly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just choose to be better. The world teaches cruelty, yes, but I don't have to follow that lesson. Neither do you." The hatchlings nestled close to the widow, and she curled around them protectively. Rhett leaned back, hands behind his head, watching the stars. He knew more dangers would come, more patrols, more challenges. But he also knew something stronger. Courage and patience could protect the weak, even in a harsh universe. In the canyon, the dragons slept more peacefully than they had in days. And Rhett, the human who did not turn away, kept watch, ready for the next challenge, proving that true strength was not weapons or power, but the will to protect and endure. The desert was quiet again, but Rhett Calder did not let the calm fool him. The Imperial patrols had retreated, but they would not forget the canyon. He knew more would come, sooner or later. Still, he focused on the dragons. Hunger was no longer their only threat. Safety, knowledge, and hope were just as important. He approached the widow and her hatchlings carefully, carrying a small bundle. "I've got something for you," he said, setting it down on a flat rock. The dragons watched him warily. He opened it slowly to reveal simple tools: water flasks, a small metal trap, and packs of seeds for desert plants. "These will help you survive. Not just today, but tomorrow and the day after." The widow tilted her head, confused. "Food? More than food?" she asked. Rhett nodded. "Yes. You need more than food. You need ways to survive. Knowledge, tools, safety. I can't fight the Empire forever, but I can teach you how to protect yourselves." The hatchlings chirped softly, stepping closer. Rhett smiled. He showed them how to set the water flasks to catch dew overnight, and how to hide seeds in the sand to sprout later. It was small, careful work, but it gave the dragons something new: control over their own survival. He watched them learn. One hatchling struggled to balance a flask on a small rock. Rhett bent down and steadied it. "There. Not perfect, but it works. You'll get better." The hatchling's eyes brightened, and it tried again, this time more carefully. The widow observed silently, realizing something she had never expected. Humans could teach, and they could care without taking. Her scales relaxed slightly. "You teach, not take," she whispered. "Why?" Rhett shrugged. "Because it matters. Survival isn't just food or water. It's knowing where to go, what to do, who to trust. You'll survive longer if you learn to protect yourselves." As the afternoon passed, Rhett worked with them on small strategies. He showed the dragons how to move quietly across the rocks, how to hide from scanners, and how to sense danger. The hatchlings practiced cautiously, stumbling but learning with each attempt. He also gave them something else: a hidden path. Using old maps and notes, he led the widow to a narrow canyon trail that was off Imperial maps. "This way," he said. "It's safer. You can travel to other valleys, find water and shelter. Stay hidden. You won't be free forever, but you'll be safe for now." The widow looked at him, eyes shining with trust. "You care more than I expected," she said. "Not just food, life." Rhett smiled. "Life is more than food. You need to know it's worth protecting. You need to know you can survive even if the Empire tries to stop you." As night fell, Rhett lit a small fire at a safe distance from the dragons. He shared some rations, but the food was no longer the most important gift. Knowledge and safety mattered more. He taught them how to move at night, how to find safe water pools, and how to use the stars for navigation. The hatchlings listened carefully, their young minds absorbing the lessons. The widow curled around them, protective but calm. She understood now that survival did not only depend on strength or firepower. It depended on wisdom, trust, and allies. And here was one human who had given her all three. Rhett watched the fire flicker and spoke quietly. "You'll need courage too. Not just for today but for every day after. The Empire will come back or someone else will. You have to be ready. Not to fight blindly but to survive smartly." The hatchlings chirped, pressing against him in a gesture of trust. The widow looked on, and for the first time in weeks she felt a sense of calm. The world had been cruel. Humans had been cruel. But here was one human who proved the stories were not always true. Rhett stayed with them through the night, keeping watch. He thought about his own life, how he had wandered alone, how he had seen cruelty in the world, but here he saw something new. The dragons could learn, adapt, and survive if given a chance. And perhaps, in their survival, he had found a purpose beyond himself. By dawn, the desert was quiet again. The hatchlings practiced walking along the rocky edges, learning to balance and observe. The widow guided them patiently. Rhett handed them more small tools and seeds. "Remember," he said, "it's not just food. It's your future. Protect it, use it wisely, and survive." The widow lowered her head in acknowledgement. "We understand. You gave more than food, more than survival, hope." Rhett smiled softly. "Hope is stronger than hunger. It will carry you farther than anything else." Before leaving, he marked small paths and safe spots along the canyon. He did not know if he would return soon, but he knew he had changed their chances. They would live because they learned, because they had knowledge and courage now, not just because someone fed them. As he mounted his crawler and looked back, the widow and hatchlings waved their wings faintly, a small gesture of gratitude. Rhett waved back. No words were needed. The desert wind carried their quiet promise: survival, learning, hope, and the memory of a human who gave more than food. The desert had grown quiet again, but the canyon still carried the memory of the night before. Rhett Calder rode slowly across the red plains, the wind lifting dust around his boots. He had stayed with the dragons long enough for them to understand more than just survival. They had learned to trust, to hide, to move with caution, and to see hope in a world that often offered none. He glanced back at the canyon where he had left them. The widow watched him from a high rock ledge, her hatchlings clinging close to her side. Their eyes followed him, bright with curiosity and gratitude. They were not just alive, they were learning to live. That mattered more to Rhett than anything else. As he rode toward the distant settlements, word of what had happened began to spread. Traders, travelers, and even scavengers passed along the story. A human cowboy had aided dragons, fed them, and taught them to survive. Some doubted it at first, thinking it was a trick or an exaggeration. But those who had glimpsed the dragons themselves knew it was true. A human had stood alone against the Empire, had not taken what was not his, and had given more than anyone expected. In the canyon, the widow whispered to her hatchlings. "Humans, some, are not all, cruel," she said. "He gave us more than food. He gave hope and knowledge." The hatchlings chirped softly, practicing what Rhett had taught them, moving cautiously along rocks and hiding in shadows. They had learned something no predator could take: the skill to survive on their own. Rhett did not seek fame or reward. He rode from settlement to settlement, trading goods and supplies, helping humans when he could, but never returning to the canyon. He knew the dragons did not need him anymore. His work had been to give them a start, to plant the seeds of survival. The rest was up to them. But the frontier remembered. Whispers became stories. Stories became legend. Humans spoke of the cowboy who fed dragons without fear, who taught them how to hide and find water, and who stood against imperial patrols without raising a weapon. They spoke of his quiet courage, his steady hands, and his patient voice. Even dragons in nearby valleys heard the tale and began to trust humans in small ways, seeing them as allies instead of predators. The widow and her hatchlings explored their new canyon territory carefully, testing their skills. They caught small prey, found hidden pools, and learned to avoid patrols. They began to fly short distances between cliffs, their wings growing strong with each practice. The widow watched them proudly, remembering the human who had changed their lives. Rhett's influence extended further than he knew. Nearby settlers began to adopt similar practices. They left small caches of water and food for stranded creatures, warned travelers of patrols, and taught survival skills to those who were weak. The frontier slowly shifted. Human courage and compassion became tools, just as important as guns or armor. People began to see that helping others, even creatures unlike themselves, could shape the future in ways no fight or raid could. Months passed. Rhett continued his travels, moving quietly across deserts, plains, and mountains. He helped humans, repaired machines, and traded supplies, but he never returned to the canyon. It was not needed. The dragons had learned what he had to teach. They would survive and thrive because of knowledge, courage, and hope, the same things that had guided him through the harshest days of the frontier. The widow looked at the stars one night, her hatchlings resting beside her. "He gave us more than survival," she whispered. "He gave us life and freedom." The hatchlings chirped softly, tilting their heads to the sky as if agreeing. They had learned that strength was not only in scales and wings but also in understanding, courage, and trust. Rhett moved across the frontier quietly, a lone figure in the vast desert, but the memory of his actions endured. People and dragons alike remembered the human who had given more than food. They remembered the patience, the teaching, and the courage that had saved lives without demanding anything in return. In settlements far from the canyon, his story became a lesson. Strength could be measured not by weapons or domination, but by what one gave to others when no one was watching. Years later, travelers passing near the canyon spoke of dragons thriving in hidden valleys, moving cautiously but with confidence. They spoke of a human who had helped them, teaching them survival and hope. No reward, no glory, no statues, just the quiet knowledge that one human's compassion had changed the frontier. Rhett himself did not linger on fame or legend. He rode on, helping where he could, living simply and staying true to the principle that had guided him. When you have the chance to help, you do it. The dragons would carry his lesson forward, and the frontier, harsh as it was, had learned something new about humans, that courage, patience, and kindness were among the strongest powers in the galaxy. The canyon lay silent once more, but life had returned. The hatchlings flew carefully between cliffs, the widow watched over them, and small plants sprouted where Rhett had buried seeds. It was not just survival. It was life, thriving, and hope. And in that quiet, the frontier remembered the human cowboy who gave more than food. Rhett rode under the stars, wind at his back, dust in his boots, and a quiet smile on his face. The galaxy would not know him as a hero. Statues would not rise in his honor. But somewhere in the desert, in a hidden canyon, 3 dragons and their descendants would remember, and in their memory humanity had made its mark. Courage, compassion, and knowledge. These were the gifts that would carry life forward, far beyond the reach of any empire. The frontier would remember. And in remembering, it would never be the same again.